The Minions is a movie released in 2015, and it involves these Fanta bottle-shaped individuals here. They were originally from a movie called Despicable Me, but they performed so well on Facebook memes shared between all middle-aged people of the world that they got their own movie. It's a prequel, so you may think that you need to know the background, but you don't. In this video I will of course do the obvious thing and force a political message into a summary of a children's movie. If you don't want to see that, then shouldn't have clicked on here. On this channel I make many silly videos like these, where I lure people in with a children's movie and then I smash them over the head with the information about the Niso Square massacre. Wait, that was a spoiler. Anyway, the movie starts off following what appear to be unicellular organisms that begin following around larger ones. When they emerge from the water, fully formed for some reason, they immediately search for a boss, and the narrator tells us that they always wanted the worst person they could have as their leader. We get a montage where they follow a dinosaur, then a man, a bear, and so on. Later, they serve the pharaohs of Egypt, which finally settles the question of who built the pyramids. It wasn't the alien, it was these. So, well, maybe they actually are aliens. Over time, they also serve Dracula, because apparently he was the evilest person in Europe. They then serve a person who Discovery Channel used to call the first Antichrist, when impressionable 12-year-old me watched, Napoleon. I'm not entirely sure on the title of Antichrist, but he was basically sending Europe to war over and over for no gain, except lots of business for funeral services. So naturally, the minions served him. Well, until they accidentally kill Napoleon and the French army chases them away. I'm sure you know what leaders came after Napoleon. Many bad men. Chancellor Hindenburg was waging war all over Prussia. The pro-slavery leaders in the Confederate States, the arbiters of World War I, and of course the Nazis, who were easily the worst people in history. So what happened after Napoleon? Did they join the ranks of the people fighting to presume slavery? Were they dressed in Prussian blue and bombarded the encircled, helpless Paris Commune? Did they join the armies of World War I? Were they perhaps researchers making poison gas to aid war crimes for the sake of victory? And after the First World War, did they become Nazis? And SS members too? Well, of course not, it's a children's story. You see, the French army drove them to some frozen place, and they decided on a cave to live in. They skipped everything from Napoleon onwards. Also, fact that they killed Napoleon makes me believe that the minions must be in a different timeline to ours. If you have an alternative history channel, I hereby give you this video idea. What if the minions killed Napoleon? Not sure if the minions in the title attract or scare off viewers. I suppose we can tell after this video is out. At this point, we learned enough about the minions to assign what group they represent. As you know, in every video I title Marxist analysis, I need to somehow make unbelievable parallels to reality. We know they are small and weak, but extremely loyal and eager to serve. As a matter of fact, when they're in the cave, they're all slowly growing depressed because of their lack of purpose. So it's obvious now what their parallel in the real world is. So let's say it together. Private military contractors. Yes, private individuals paid to go to war. And do you know who joins PMCs? People who are eager to serve and cannot live a civilian life because they're disillusioned with the lack of purpose. They work for armies and states or maybe even private corporations and individuals. And because they're not an organized army, the state they work for is not responsible for the crimes they commit. PMCs are responsible for some of the worst human rights violations in the recent decades. Yes, the cute yellow banana beings from your mom's Facebook page are actually unaccountable private citizens that have taken arms up for money to fight for the worst person they can possibly find. They are war crime machines. And as we would expect with no immoral leadership, they grow miserable. They have spent nearly 150 years in the ice cave now, and they're suffering from a mass feeling of uselessness without a war criminal to support. So, a brave hero called Kevin makes himself available. He decides to lead an expedition to find a new boss for all the minions. we end up with Kevin, Stuart and Bob. What's interesting is that their height and maturity correlate. We have the smart long one, which was my nickname in high school because I'm 6'5", and then we have the average middle one, and the third one, which acts like a literal child, and sounds like it too, which is an interesting choice. Our brave heroes cross a continent, another continent, an ocean, and another continent, making it impossible to know which big ice region they lived in, up or down. They eventually arrive in New York in 1968, and they immediately walk past the sign of Richard Nixon saying, "Finally a president you can trust," which is funny because he would infamously support many CIA coups in independent Latin American countries, and he also broke constitutional protocol and used the powers of the office to gather information for his re-election. He stepped down and was immediately pardoned by his vice president. So, we do not even know the full extent of his crimes. Listening to that, you may think that Richard Nixon would be a great boss, but they don't go there. But it adds Richard Nixon to the Minion World timeline. Our short three heroes bumble around the city a bit and randomly get information for a villain con, where all the best, most evil villains of the world are meeting, so they go there. From this on, they no longer work for governments like they did under Napoleon and the Pharaoh, but for individuals, in this case any villain that will take them in. This shows that even when private military contractors are intended to work for the government, they do not always find contracts, so they serve whoever will pay them. Even private individuals, just like the Minions are doing. Then the Minions come along to a big show by the biggest villain in the world, Scarlett Overkill. Yes, a woman being the greatest criminal in the world, and that's in the 60s. It sounds made up. Just remember, in the 60s, women could not own a house or take out a loan without a signature from a man. Before the feminist movements of the 70s and 80s, women were often legally discriminated against. So you may wonder, with the average person and the law against her, how can she become the biggest villain? Well, duh, she's a criminal. She's not listening to discriminatory laws or people. She just blows shit up. Scarlett first flies in with the rocket hidden in her skirt and then decides that whoever can take a diamond from her hand will be her new assistant. This leads to a cool fighting scene between the villains, which represents the fact that it has been 30 minutes into a children's movie and there was no cartoon violence yet. Eventually, through dumb luck, the Minions acquire the diamond. This tells us something about the story structure here. First, they randomly found the villain con, and now this. These two incidents make it obvious that the story being told is led by random events rather than character agency, progression, or logical deductions, representing the best writing since the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. Scarlett takes the Minions with her to London and they meet Hal, who is her partner. And I'm just saying, look at those character models. Their hips, their waists and the size of their limbs are all completely impossible to achieve. Images like this one are what anorexic people look at while they starve themselves to death. Anyways, Scarlett lets the Minions know what she wants. She wants the crown jewels of the United Kingdom, and she tells her 3 new Minions to get it for her, as a sort of initiation. So they're armed by Hal and sent towards it. Also, they do a high five, which is historically inaccurate, as the high five was only invented in 1977, which is 9 years after the events of this movie, clearly a well-thought-out part of the Minion timeline. Eventually, the devilish trio arrive, and the Tower of London, and they pay admission so they can see the crown. And then they try to break in, but the crown is given to the Queen for some ceremony. So they kidnap the royal coach and get on a wild chase all throughout London. And Kevin tries to take the jewels from the Queen, fucking beats the shit out of him. I gotta say, the Minions movie is surprisingly feminist, because there's not a single female character in distress, and both the Queen and Scarlett are strong individuals. Now, you may not care about that. And then when they're surrounded and almost arrested for, kidnapping the Queen, Bob just pulls a sword out of a rock, which, as we all know, is the official coronation procedure for the throne, because the police immediately bow down in front of him, and he's declared King Bob, and the people are excited. He immediately dresses the royal guards in a far less intimidating outfit and moves into Buckingham Palace, where we see Stuart decide to go for a swim, and he's wearing a thong. And I had to see it, so you have to see it as well. The image won't leave my mind. Also, during his speech, King Bob is wearing the Queen's crown, not the King's crown, which means that this movie is wrong. Or that gender roles do not apply to sentient multivitamin turrets like the Minions, which would be surprisingly progressive. Unfortunately, not everyone is happy at the thought of King Bob, most notably Scarlett, who really wanted to wear that crown and become a queen, which is now impossible, apparently. So she storms into Buckingham Palace and puts guns to the Minions' faces for supposedly betraying her. Of course, King Bob gives her the crown immediately. Interestingly enough, he has to change the laws to transfer the monarchy, and they just show Bob changing all the laws, which is accurate. Within the United Kingdom, the sovereign can make any law they decide to, semi-legitimately, which is a reminder that the UK is a hereditary dictatorship with a sham parliament. Then there is a scene where Hal puts on a corset on Scarlett because she wants her waist to be even smaller. So they actually joke about Scarlett's unrealistic body, so they're aware that it's not a healthy image to present, but they still presented it. Then Scarlett, the meanie, puts the Minions in what seems like a medieval dungeon below Buckingham Palace. Now, I did not check this, but this dungeon may actually exist in real life. Why, you may ask? Well, because if a family is as fucked up as the royals, you can never know. Hal turns up to torture the Minions, which fails because they're too stretchy, I guess, which suggests that they have no bones or tendons. So Hal tries to hang them, which of course fails, because these little yellow fellas have no necks. Scarlett, immediately discarding the Minions after they've done the singular job for which they were employed, has parallels in real life. Private military contractors are often used for patrolling wartime areas, but when the war is over, they're dropped and left to deal with their mental health on their own. PMCs do not get to go to the VA. But then again, PMCs are some of the units most likely to engage in war crimes, so maybe fuck them. Eventually, Hal leaves the Minions and they escape through a sewer where little Bob befriends a rat. The rat owners, I know, would like me to note that rats are excellent pets because they can be toilet trained, they remember faces and tricks, and they're incredibly social animals. So, good for Bob to have found a companion. At her coronation, Queen Scarlett grabs the priest and says, "Here, let me squeeze you. Ooh, you are so squishy." Which is incidentally what I say to my belly fat every day in the mirror. Yeah, that wasn't funny. 2 anorexia jokes in one video is really pushing it. Anyways, the Minions decide that they want to make things right with Scarlett, so they steal a wreath of flowers from a funeral because it says sorry on it. They decide to break into the coronation of Scarlett. They must be pretty good climbers because they enter via the top. Eventually, a bee arrives to drive the plot forward with our favorite random things happening. The Minions on the chandelier run in a circle, which causes it to drop on Scarlett. I believe this means they have lost their employer for good. Just a feeling though. Incredibly, Scarlett has what appears to be a tank hidden inside her skirt, so she's unharmed. But now she's really pissed at the Minions. The wedding was of course mostly visited by villains, who we already saw in VillainCon, so Scarlett tells them to hunt down and kill the Minions. There is an intense chase scene in which the villains constantly gain on the Minions, yet never catch them. Except for Bob and Stuart, who do get captured. This leads Kevin to go to a bar, where the former queen is beating people in arm wrestling. Eventually, Bob decides on a plan. He will run to the giant castle which Scarlett has built in London and go get some weapons. More heavily armed than Sylvester Stallone in Rambo 5, he immediately runs away when the enemy presents himself. And now, because of our favorite writing tool, random events, Bob enters a machine which makes him huge. That scares off the villains. Scarlett, knowing that you cannot hang Minions, instead decided to blow the two up with tons upon tons of TNT in the middle of London, which reminds me of the IRA, but I found no smooth joke to make. Kevin, meanwhile, is moving through London, towards his friends, and it seems like Godzilla. He destroys buildings left and right and center, and he probably killed many innocent civilians during the course of this rampage, which further confirms that he represents a private military contractor. You see, PMCs are well known for their likelihood to ignore the laws of war. For example, in the Iraq War, a group of private military contractors just opened fire on civilians in a busy intersection. There was no threat to them made at all, and they shot and killed 17 people and left life-changing injuries on 20 more. This is what's known as a Nisour Square massacre. But hey, they were Americans, so I'm sure that they were convicted of the murders and punished accordingly, right? Wrong, they were pardoned by Trump, showing that consequences do not apply if you work for the right people. Just as there are no consequences for Kevin levelling this central London. Eventually, he arrives at the explosives and just picks up Stuart and Bob, which Scarlett does not like, so her skirt transforms into a rocket, as you do, and she tries to fly in his face, I guess, which is a similar tactic to the ones flies use to annoy us. At this point, the rest of the minions arrive. A lot of minutes ago, Kevin called them and said, "Yo, we found a new super boss, she's named Scarlett." And now these poor beings show up and Scarlett immediately tries to kill them all. She turns the road into lava, and her skirt now somehow includes an ICBM, which she fires at the minions, and which will erase London from the face of the earth. But Kevin is a big boy now, so he grabs the missile, and instead of pointing it another way, he just kinda eats it. Scarlett then tries to fly away from the blast, but Big Kevin grabs the rocket, and they both fly into the air. Then there's a big explosion. The fact that they're a kilometer away above the city prevents it from destroying it, which it's definitely how shockwaves work. The minions make sad gibberish noises to mourn their fallen comrade, but then, for some reason, Kevin sails down with his giant pants as a parachute. He survived. How did he survive, and why is he small again? Nobody knows, it's not remotely explained at all. My best assumption is that they're immortal beings from hell. That would explain why they want their bosses to be villains. Eventually, the minions have a turn of heart and return the crown to the rightful Queen of England, since they blew up Scarlett. When they go to return it, Bob brought his rat friend, which is cute. The Bob and rat friendship is my favorite subplot of the movie. They eventually get all rewards. Bob gets a tiny crown for his teddy, Stuart gets a guitar, and Kevin gets knighted by the Queen. Everything is nice and summed up, and the movie is ready to go to credit, but then shocker! Scarlett somehow survived the explosion, presumably using her skirt-integrated tank, and she takes the crown. But then she is stopped by a devilish little man with black hair, a nose that could stab someone, who uses his invention to freeze them into a block of ice. It's him, the man, the most despicable person on the planet. It's Gru. If you have not seen Despicable Me, he's the guy they work for in that movie. He leaves Scarlett and Hal to presumably die of hypothermia and just flies away with the crown jewels, and the minions follow him. The end. Except not, because apparently there's a second Minions movie, which I've not heard of before this one. Well, if that does not scream sequel, what does? In conclusion, the Minions are a group of individuals who existed since the dawn of time and who are immortal and unable to reproduce. They seem to have been formed by an intelligence, which has the goal of supporting the most destructive people in the world. Which makes me again repeat my theory that they are hell demons. They're not loyal to any leaders or even species. They opportunistically change the host every time they find a stronger one, and showing that they're organized warriors, selling their ability to the worst people they can find. They are private military contractors, aka mercenaries. They do not shy back from any job, no matter how dirty. They do not regard civilian property as something to be protected. They literally break into a shopping mall and steal a lot of stuff. Not to mention Big Kevin pulling off a Godzilla. They are a group of awful war criminals that, if they were around today, would be fighting for ISIS at this very moment. In conclusion, haha, you now know what the Nisour Square massacre was, even though you were just here for the memes. Full success. If you wish to see more great videos, I have a playlist with like 150 videos in it. And if you want more than that, make sure to subscribe for weekly content. Hell, why not donate to Patreon and join the Discord server so you can DM me while I'm recording audio, allowing me a good reason to procrastinate. Thank you very much for watching, and especially thanks to Theon Hartley, Alan Vo, Eric Betts, Nane Pema, V, Sandra Corvus, Tusnek, Attila Nemetz, Ben Harrison, Bodden Bitch Lena, Carissa, Dana Hyman, Dominic Zonelli, Emily Margaret Klassen, Herdina, Ian Snyder, Jane the Mentalist, Kevin Sanders, Klaus Strupp, Lazy Panda 234, Liam S, Raymond DeVille, Red Shark Trooper, Sarah, Sean Murphy, STEM Master Chef, This Was Femboy, Sinji Lillian Jr., Travis, and Yamil.